Okay, this is Mrs. Coro again, and what we're going to do today is we're going to get started adding some watercolor to our watercolor sample paper here. We have already drawn out the blocks, we have added the labels for each one, and now we're going to get started. We're going to start with a basic wash. First thing I want to do though, however, is just go over a little bit of watercolor etiquette, so to speak, some do's and don'ts of using watercolor. So these are our watercolors. This happens to be a brand new set. But anytime that you get a set, whether it's been used or not, you want to check and make sure that your pails are clean. Sometimes students will accidentally go into another pail and mixed up the colors. And there's a way to clean this. And if I ever have this situation throughout these videos, unfortunately my set is clean, so I don't necessarily need to worry about it. But I do want to be mindful as I move forward not to contaminate another pail with a different color. Very, very important. That's one thing. The second thing that you want to do is you want to try to remember to get your little pails wet with a little bit of water and sort of have them activate for a few seconds before you just start digging in. I would never a watercolor with a dry watercolor pail with a wet brush. I would always and let it sort of activate and start to get a little damp. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I've got my cup of water here and my brush, and I'm just going to kind of tap off just a little bit of the water, and I'm just going to kind of touch the pail just a little bit. You want just a little bit of a puddle there. I don't know if you can see that, but there's just a little bit of a puddle of water in there. And you might want to think about if you're going to be using any colors in the very near future as you are sitting down to a session of watercolor painting. And you may want to go ahead and get those activated as well. You don't have to activate all the colors, just the ones you know you are going to use. So I'm just going to activate a few of these and sort of just let those sit for a minute. Now, very important as you're using watercolor, you want to have a little bit of some paper towel with you. Okay, so I like to take some paper towel and just kind of fold it up, have it ready to go. Always, always, always important. What I'm going to do is I'm going to always take off a little bit of water, and then sometimes I'm going to clean my brush and take all the water off if I need to do some touching up on some areas. So I'll explain that as I go, but just make sure that you have a nice large piece of water paper folded up and ready to go for you. Okay, so I've been sitting for a few seconds, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to get started on just what we call just a wash. And a wash is basically just a solid color of watercolor. Now, when you're adding watercolor, you want to make sure that you are adding it at about 30% opacity. And I don't have an example right by an idea of what that means. 100% opacity would mean that you would not see any of the white showing through. The watercolor would not look transparent at all, okay? It would just be very opaque, kind of like tempera paint or acrylic paint, okay? With watercolor, that is not what we want. We want something lighter than that, very transparent. This is called watercolor paint for a reason. It's supposed to look kind of like stained glass. And while there are varying degrees of opacity that we can use, it's always best to start off with about a 30% opacity and build up from there. So that's what I'm going to try to go for on this particular example here. So I'm going to use this square that says wash, and I'm going to show you how to get just a basic color wash. Some watercolor artists will do this a couple of different ways. I'm just going to show you the direct application method, and that looks like this. I've got my brush. As you can see, I took off just a few of the droplets because I still want my brush pretty damp, and I'm going to be using the color that I already put a little puddle into, and I'm just going to dip and flip my brush. I'm never going into it or put my brush directly perpendicular into the pail. I'm always going to do it kind of like horizontal and sideways, okay? Then I'm going to start taking my color. This is about 50% opacity right here, but I'm just going to start bringing it down. I'm going to get a little bit more water on my brush and start bringing it back up, bringing it down, bringing it back up. I can even kind of do the sides a little bit. And what I'm looking for in this wash is an even, uniformed value of the color. And I know that I've done a pretty good job because it's not opaque. I can see the word wash underneath. It's still light, but it's like stained glass. So this is a really good 30% watercolor wash we have right here. And so that's how you would do the direct method of the watercolor wash. Another way of doing a watercolor wash is kind of like color blocking is what we call it actually. And what you would do is you would lay down your color first and then add your wash into it, or excuse me, your color into it. And I can show you how to do that here on the blended wash. Now a blended wash is going to be two colors that are going to be blended in together. So this is how I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do it with the color blocking method. So I got my brush pretty wet, taking off just a little bit of the water, and I'm just going to come down here and apply the water all over this area. Notice also that I didn't do the gradient wash. I didn't do the gradient wash next because my wash area is still wet. When I paint two wet areas together in watercolor, they're going to bleed together. Sometimes that's like in the you're about to see. But when I don't want something to blend together, I need to let one area dry completely before I begin the area next to it, okay? Now, since I've been talking just a little bit, this may have dried up just a tad, so I'm just going to go ahead and layer another water on there. Okay, now colors that I want. I'm going to do two different colors. I'm going to use red, so I'm dipping and flipping. I'm just going to apply, look how pretty that is. I'm just going to apply a little bit of water this way, and I'm only going to bring it about, excuse me, a little bit of color this way. I'm only going to bring it about halfway down. I'm going to clean my brush off now. Okay, take off a few droplets. Now I'm going to go to the yellow. I'm going to do a little bit more on there. It's kind of hard to see. There we go. And I'm going to blend that back up into my red. And see how they kind of blend together? This is called a blended wash, okay? And a blended wash is a great technique when you're doing sunsets, when you're doing water, anytime you want something to kind of blend together and look very liquidy. Now notice what's happening here. I've got a big puddle of water here, and my red is coming down into, I really just want this area to be just yellow. Sometimes it would be okay, but in this case, I want it to be just regular yellow. So I'm gonna take my brush, and with my paper towel, I'm gonna dry it off completely. I'm gonna squeeze that water out of there. I'm gonna flatten my brush a little bit. I'm gonna take my brush, and I'm gonna go right on top of that area and just touch it, and it took up want there, right? So any area that you have that may have traveled, or maybe you have a little bit too much of a puddle and you really don't want that much of a puddle, take a clean brush, squeeze the water out. I like to flatten it a little bit, and then you can go and just barely touch those areas that you want, where you don't want the puddle of water. Sometimes it's good for making corrections if you went out the line a little bit, that kind of thing, okay? And this is a really good way to make any little corrections. So just to review, we did two washes here. We did where we did the direct color method, okay? And then we did a blended wash where we did the color blocking. So basically I blocked out my area with water first, then I dipped my water into, I took the color onto my brush and I dipped it into the water and watched it kind of spread. And I did the same thing the opposite way so that my colors could blend together. Last thing I'm going to say, and then I want you to practice this, is the following. When you're doing a blended wash, be careful that you don't blend complementary colors together. And remember that our complementary colors are red and green, okay, orange and blue, violet and yellow. When you blend those colors together, they make kind of a gray wash, and you don't want that. You want something that's, unless that's what you're wanting on your painting, of course, but in this case for the practice, make sure it's colors that when they blend together, they make another color, like blue and yellow, or red and blue, those kinds of things, okay? You could even do two types of green or two types of blue, depending on what you have in your watercolor. Okay, so that is how you do a wash and a blended wash. I'm going to let these dry. And then in the next video, we're going to talk about some of the techniques that are down here at the bottom.